Now, we'll talk about corn and soybeans. USDA pegged the corn crop at 169.5 bushels per acre, down from 170.7. Interesting how they called their trend yield 170.7 in May, and then in the data, the support data for this report, they put out a graphic that showed 169.5 as being their trend yield. Soybeans, 49.4. Their trend yield is 48. That's where they were last month. That's where they've been all spring. They come in 49.4. In explaining this 100, well, I'm going to start with soybeans first of all, because that's the easier one to, well, I was going to say easier one to explain, but easier one to deal with. How about if I say that? The trade, and I would agree with this, the trade and the industry who we surveyed, knowing that the bulk of the soybean, what determines the yield on the soybean crop comes after USDA was walking the fields the 1st of August. It comes in the month following that. And not just walking the fields, but surveying farmers. So when Commodity Weather Group did a survey of other similar analog years, and they found like 7 other years, I believe it was, they found other years that had similar crop condition ratings, similar rainfall for the Midwest, and similar temperatures. They saw final yields anywhere from 16% below trend to 5% above trend in those years. That would be the equivalent of basically anywhere from 40 bushels to 50 bushels per acre. Huge difference, huge range, and that's because yield is determined in this month following when USDA is out in the field to determine for this crop report. So the expectation was that USDA would come out with something close to trend until more is known, but if there was a bias, it was a little bit of bias to the downside, not much, a little bit of a bias though, because roughly 1/3 of the Midwest is under significant moisture stress at this time. The crop is smaller in stature. Now it can pack a lot of pods on that smaller crop, but it is smaller in stature, and we do have widespread herbicide volatility issues, shall we say, in the core of the Midwest. And so that's why the bias is slightly below trend. USDA comes out with something that's almost 1.5 bushels above trend. Do I have a problem with the 49.4 bushels per acre as a final yield? No, that's very possible. We could be even higher than that. We could match last year's yield. That is still very possible. Or we could end up at a 45 bushel yield. It's just a surprise that USDA did the 49.4 bushels per acre in this report. And I think when you look at what we know of their methodology, it's just very puzzling how they could have come up with that number. But it is what it is, and it has to be traded and it has to be respected because it is very possible. It is very possible, as I said, that we could even repeat last year's yield, 52.1 bushels per acre. And so therefore we have to respect this number, and it is very possible. And what this number does is communicates to trade that possibility of a higher yield must be respected. But will we end up with a 49.4? There's no way of knowing. And here again, the safest bet was probably a trend yield around 48 bushels per acre, but it is what it is. Now, that gives us a crop of 4.381 billion bushels, which is, about 160 million above what the trade was anticipating. And so certainly in about 150 million bushels above what I was looking for. Let's talk about corn now, the 169.5. It's been the understanding of the trade that USDA was using a model for its August crop report that it outlined in a white paper published in 2013. And if you use what that model defines as its parameters for determining yield, excuse me, it would suggest by our calculations that the yield should have come out around 167, 167.5. So we did not expect USDA to come down as far as the trade was at a little over 166, and certainly not as far low as what we are for our final yield estimate based on our most recent survey, 162.8. We did not, though, expect it, nor very few expected it to come in with a 169.5. Now, it came out in USDA's Twitter chat that they did not use that model that I just described, but instead they depended upon objective yield data and their farmer survey. Now, two issues with that. Their objective yield data for the bulk of the Midwest Corn Belt would have been with immature crops. USDA did admit that its ear weight, which I'll show you in a bit, ear weight was modeled and not measured, as you can imagine, because of the lack of maturity of the crop on August 1st. It just finished pollinating. Much of the corn was in the blister stage at best. Some had not even pollinated on August 1st. And so the 169.5, okay. So objective, that covers the objective plots that they would have looked at. All it would have given them kind of is population counts, and that's about it. So now let's look at the farmer survey. And I know we have a lot of farmers on this call, and so I want to say this respectively, that from our observations and what we've heard, and I interact with a lot of farmers, most farmers were not in the fields yet on August 1st. They were driving by their fields, and they have just this week started going into the fields to do yield checks. Now, what we've been hearing is anecdotal, so that may not prove to be fact in the end, but the anecdotal that we've been hearing to this point from the major producing areas of the Midwest are, wow, when we walked into the field, it was not as good as what we saw from the road. So does that mean that this yield estimate goes down in September, or does it go up from here? Well, that's the big question mark. I've told you what we're hearing and what we see and what our industry survey showed, our client survey, which has a pretty good track record. The question now is what other information comes out from this point, and there's two factors that will play into that. First of all is the Pro Farmer Crop Tour, which is the week of August 21st. That will be critical, I think. Here, first of all, the crop will have another 3 weeks of maturity on it, both corn and soybeans. And second of all, it is a systematic walk through the fields going across the Midwest. So it gets you away from just a little bit of this anecdotal reports. You get more of everything, and so you get a better picture of the variability of the crop. So that should give us a lot of ground truth this year. I normally have a lot of interest in this tour and what comes out of it in years when we have a big crop to see just how big the crop might be, or a small crop, we see just how small the crop might be. But this year, I'm really looking forward to what comes out of it, because I want to see what is said, what we learn about the variability of the crop. But our current sense is that we're still sticking with the 162.8 for final yield, and then we'll survey again on September 1. And then the other factor I was going to say is September crop report. By the time USDA is in the field September 1st for the September crop report, we'll have a lot more maturity in the crop. They'll be able to rely much more heavily on the objective data, which will mean more then. And the farmers will also know a lot more that they survey as well, simply because more time has passed and they will have been in the field. But these are the numbers that will be traded. These are numbers that were traded. And the fact that we ended up near the session lows today suggests that the market for now believes these numbers. We'll see if we get a bounce tomorrow overnight